Alrighty, party peoples of the interwebs, not a fun video to make, but I think it has to be made because on the one hand, there's a lot of rumors circulating and there's a lot of disinformation and gossip circulating. And on the other hand, there's some legalese that needs to be explained and people just need to know what's going on. You've all heard Nick Rekieta, his wife, and a third person, April Imholt, were arrested yesterday, May 23rd, 2024. And the charges initially were possession of controlled substance in possession of a firearm, and there's a third charge, we'll get to it in a second. Nick Rekieta, you all know him. He's been around LawTube for years now. Everybody got to know Nick personally, thoroughly during the Rittenhouse trial. He's been involved in the Vic Magnola trial since way back in the day. A very smart man, clearly capable, and also clearly flawed like the rest of us. And he has a problem which has been more or less apparent to a lot of people for many years. Some people knew, there's a problem with drinking on streams, getting excessively drunk and saying silly things on streams. A lot of us had seen this for a little while, but it quite clearly metastasized, I don't know how recently, into something far more serious. Addiction. I mean, addiction is something that people struggle with. Addiction is something that turns people into automatons. It's something that turns people into monsters. It's something that turns people into entities that they are not. And there's a lot of coverage going on now that is kicking someone when they are at what many of us hope is their lowest. It could be worse, it could get worse, and hopefully it doesn't get there. But there's a lot of mockery, there's a lot of kicking someone when they're down, and there's a lot of gossip and snipping and clipping and all this stuff, and you can see it. Not pointing any fingers or naming any names. I've just been reluctant to comment on this because it feels sordid and it feels gossipy. Bottom line, some elements need to be known so that there won't be any misinformation or disinformation, and so people can make sense of it and at the very least know what is true as of what we know now and what is not true. So Nick Rekieta was arrested yesterday. The mugshot, it's not going to be the mugshot that goes around the world like Donald Trump et al. But for those in the LawTube milieu, it's going to be a mugshot that's going to be around forever. The internet is forever. And when something like this happens, even if you can find redemption and find a way to turn it into a positive over the long run, it's going to exist forever, as are some of the clips that people are, I would say, callously and maliciously sharing and resharing. He was arrested with his wife, a third person, April Imholt. I don't know who she is, and I don't say that in like an arrogant way whatsoever. I know she's an internet personality, but our respective spheres have never crossed paths. Arrested yesterday. The charges initially seem to be possession of a controlled substance, a class 5 felony, which I think is a lower class than what he was ultimately charged with. Because I listened to the arraignment. He had a live streamed arraignment this morning, a bond hearing for bond release, he and his wife. And I listened to it, and bottom line, I'm taking a little bit of notes. The three charges ultimately that he, his wife Kayla, and April Imholt have been charged with is felony possession of a controlled substance of 25 grams or more. I think it's cocaine and or methamphetamine. And that carries with it a maximum sentence of 25 years in prison. It's a serious freaking felony. The other two charges are gross misdemeanor, child neglect, which is the third charge, because apparently, they had these controlled substances and firearms in presence of children. So that's a gross gross misdemeanor, sorry, that carries with it a maximum sentence of 364 days. And then the other gross misdemeanor was possession of firearms in presence of a controlled substance. And, a detail, it's not even a detail, it's the absolute tragedy in all of this. Addiction, when it destroys a person's life, is tragic enough. Addiction, when it destroys the lives of the family, is tragic enough. Nick and Kayla have 5 kids, and they will probably be the biggest victims in all of this. They'll probably be the ones who suffer the most in all of this if this doesn't get turned around. I won't say into a net positive, but if this doesn't get turned around. And that is the ultimate tragedy in all of this. 5 kids who saw their parents get hauled off in cuffs, detained overnight. They're released on bond now. So the bond conditions were $50,000 bond and travel restrictions, other restrictions that both Nick and Kayla agreed to. Interesting legalese from the bond hearing. Nick presents first and says that he is going to also act as counsel for the other two co-defendants. It apparently seems that April Imholt, or the third of the three, had already been released prior to Nick being able to, in as much as he can as a defendant, act as counsel to the other two co-defendants. April had already been released. Some people are hypothesizing that that might be an indication that she's cooperating with authorities. I listened to the hearing. The judge sounded relatively sympathetic. I don't know how understanding, people in the legal system are going to be with these types of charges because they're serious. And we are sincerely all hoping that Nick finds the help that he needs. And hopefully he's at a point where now he's going to want it, because everybody knows you can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. Hopefully we're at rock bottom and we're at that point. But the interesting legalese is Nick says, I want to represent the other two defendants. They've been denied counsel. Turns out April had already been released, but Kayla, his wife, co-defendant in all of this, said, yeah, he can represent me. The judge at the hearing said, this is interesting. I think there has to be some sort of innate conflict of interest here, because whenever there's two co-defendants, there's an innate conflict of interest where one can turn against the other in order to save one's own butt. And flip side, one can throw the other under the bus in order to save their own butt. Not imputing any of this on Rekieta or strategy. I suspect there's an underlying strategy to this, which I'll say in a second. But the bottom line, some people can say the conflict is that Kayla might want to throw Nick under the bus under ordinary circumstances because they're co-defendants. And if Nick, co-defendant, is going to represent his wife, there might be an incentive for one co-defendant to represent the other and then throw them under the bus in order to minimize their own. I don't think that's going to happen, but these are the conflict issues that a judge is going to have to determine later on. So the conflict issues aside, they got bond. My theory, my understanding, my inkling is that Nick understands he's not going to be able to represent Kayla as a co-defendant and be counsel to the other co-defendant in the context of this in the long term, but rather just manage to buy maybe 15 minutes where they can discuss, strategize, get a story straight for future court hearings. But they've both been released and they're going to go cohabitate. So they're going to talk anyhow. I suspect it was an extra 15 minutes where they can talk and strategize before Kayla came up for her bond hearing and was granted bond release on the same conditions as Nick Rekieta. So that's the legalese of all of this. I don't think there's any more notes from the hearing. I've known Nick for years. I know that I've had my concerns for a long time. I had no idea it had descended into where it had descended into. These types of things, again, happen very slowly, then all at once. And Jack Posobiec took to Twitter and said, prayers up for Rekieta. I know the community is praying for Nick. I know people are wishing him the best. I know there's other people who are going to kick a person when they're down. I know there's other people who never liked Nick in the first place and have nothing good to say about him. And they're going to take the opportunity to rejoice in someone's downfall. Bottom line, they've got 5 kids. In as much as I know Nick, he's not a bad person. Drugs and addiction will do terrible things to people. So hopefully this will be the rock bottom, the proverbial rock bottom that people speak of, and he'll be able to come back from this, if not stronger than ever, at the very least rehabilitated, but he needs to want that help as well. So we'll see where this goes. I think the next hearing is in August. And in the interim, they've been released $50,000 bond, which I think they only need to put up 10% if they find a bonding company. Travel restrictions, they can't take drugs, alcohol, periodic substance abuse testing or substance testing, which might be the silver lining in all of this. There is help out there for people who want the help, who need the help. But in as much as people need the help, they have to want the help, because you cannot help people who do not want to help themselves. So hopefully this is a big wake-up call. And I have a sneaking suspicion it is a big wake-up call. The community is wishing Nick the best, and Kayla, and April. I don't know who she is as a person, but addiction turns people into monsters, into selfish creatures that neglect those that they were put on this earth to protect, or those who they brought onto this earth to protect. So wishing Nick the best. This is the update in law, and try to avoid the gossip and kicking people when they're down. It's, I don't know how to put it other than that. That's it. That's the update. Peace.